If you are serious about building real wealth, then you need to hear something that most people are never told directly. The path that looks safe is often the most dangerous one you can take. The path that looks risky is often the one that leads to genuine financial freedom. I learned this the hard way, starting from absolutely nothing, no university degree, no family connections, no trust fund waiting in the background. Just a willingness to make decisions that most people around me thought were foolish at the time. Today I want to share 7 critical mistakes that keep ordinary people stuck in financial mediocrity for their entire lives. These are not abstract theories. Every single one of them comes from real experience, either mistakes I made myself, mistakes I watched others make, or traps I managed to avoid because someone gave me the right advice at the right moment. If you can genuinely absorb what I am about to share and actually apply it to your own situation, you will be ahead of the vast majority of people who consume this kind of content, nod along enthusiastically, and then go back to doing exactly what they were doing before. Let us get into it. Mistake number 1. Chasing money instead of value. This is the foundational error that underlies almost every other financial mistake people make, and it is so deeply embedded in how we think about work and success that most people never even question it. Here is a thought experiment. Imagine 2 people starting their careers at the same time. Person A takes the highest paying job available to them immediately. Good salary, respectable title, comfortable working environment. Their friends are impressed. Their family is proud. Within a year or 2, they are living reasonably well, going on decent holidays, driving a reasonable car. Everything looks fine on the surface. Person B makes a different decision. They take a job that pays considerably less but places them in an environment where they are constantly learning, constantly being stretched, and constantly developing capabilities that have real commercial value in the marketplace. For the first couple of years, they struggle. They watch Person A apparently thriving while they are barely covering their expenses. People around them question whether they made the right call. Fast forward 10 years. Person A has received a few incremental pay rises but has fundamentally reached the ceiling of what their role can offer. Their income has plateaued because the skills they bring to the table have not evolved significantly. They are comfortable but trapped, too financially dependent on their salary to take risks, too specialized in a narrow function to easily pivot elsewhere. Person B is in a completely different position. The skills they developed during those difficult early years have compounded. They have become genuinely excellent at things that are hard to find and highly valuable. They have options, multiple job offers, the ability to consult independently, potentially the foundation to start something of their own. Their income trajectory is not a plateau. It is a curve that keeps climbing. I lived this exact experience. I left school at 16 with no formal qualifications whatsoever. I was offered multiple job opportunities and had to make a choice. I chose to become a carpenter's apprentice. The pay was modest. The work was physically demanding. There were times when it was genuinely difficult. But the skills I was building, precision, problem solving, understanding how things are constructed and how they can fail, those skills turned out to be transferable in ways I never anticipated at the time. That experience eventually contributed directly to one of my most successful businesses, designing and selling radio-controlled aircraft to customers around the world. The understanding of materials, tolerances, and engineering principles that I absorbed as a teenage apprentice became commercially valuable decades later in a completely different industry. You cannot predict which skills will matter most in the future, which is exactly why building a broad, deep skill set is always a better investment than optimizing purely for immediate income. There is a second dimension to this beyond skills, and that is equity. Skills allow you to earn more of other people's money. Equity allows you to build wealth that belongs to you. Every self-made millionaire I have ever met or studied has at some point made the transition from being paid for their time to owning a piece of something that generates value independently of how many hours they personally work. That transition is the single most important financial move most people will ever make, and it is completely invisible if you are only focused on your monthly salary figure. Equity does not have to mean starting a business from scratch, although that is one route. It can mean negotiating for a stake in a company you join at an early stage. It can mean investing in businesses where your specific skills can accelerate growth. It can mean building something on the side while you maintain employment income until the equity position becomes self-sustaining. The specific mechanism matters less than the fundamental orientation. Are you building ownership, or are you just trading time for money? The uncomfortable truth is that trading time for money has a hard ceiling. There are only so many hours in a day, and there is only so much any employer will pay for them. Equity has no ceiling. A percentage ownership of something genuinely valuable can generate returns that no salary could ever match. This is not a secret. It is the core mechanism behind virtually every significant fortune ever built. The question is whether you are willing to accept lower immediate income in exchange for a position that could produce something extraordinary over time. Most people are not willing to make that trade. The immediate pain of earning less feels more real than the distant possibility of earning significantly more. That psychological bias is completely understandable and completely financially devastating if you give into it. Mistake number 2, performing wealth instead of building it. Open any social media platform right now and spend 5 minutes scrolling. What you will see, with remarkable consistency, is a carefully curated performance of financial success. Exotic cars on sun-soaked streets. Private airport lounges. Restaurant bills that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Watches that could fund a small business. All of it presented with an implicit message: this is what success looks like, and this is what you should be working toward. Here is what that content almost never shows you. The lease payments on that Lamborghini that absorb a significant percentage of the monthly income. The credit card balance from the Dubai trip that will take months to clear. The restaurant meal that went on a card that is already carrying a worrying balance. The financial anxiety that exists just beneath the surface of the perfectly composed photographs. I am not exaggerating this. Studies consistently show that a substantial proportion of people who project affluent lifestyles on social media are carrying significant financial stress in their private lives. The performance of wealth and the reality of wealth are two completely different things, and the gap between them is often enormous. The genuinely wealthy people I know personally are, in many cases, remarkably unimpressive to look at from the outside. They drive ordinary cars. They live in comfortable but not ostentatious homes. They wear unremarkable clothes. They do not feel the need to signal their financial position to strangers because they are not performing for an audience. Their wealth is real, documented in asset portfolios and business valuations and investment accounts, not in the reactions of people scrolling through their Instagram feed. The critical distinction that separates these two groups is where their money goes. People performing wealth direct their income toward depreciating assets and consumable experiences, things that lose value the moment you acquire them and leave you with nothing lasting. People building wealth direct their income toward appreciating assets and income-generating positions, things that grow in value over time and eventually produce returns without requiring additional input. A car purchased new loses a significant fraction of its value the moment it leaves the dealership. A designer watch purchased at retail almost never sells for more than you paid. A meal at an expensive restaurant, however enjoyable in the moment, leaves you with nothing beyond the memory. These are not necessarily bad things to spend money on. Enjoyment has genuine value, but spending money you cannot truly afford on depreciating items to impress people who do not particularly care about your financial health is a form of collective financial self-destruction that our culture has somehow normalized. Compare that to purchasing shares in well-managed companies, or acquiring a small property in a growing area, or building a position in index funds that track the broader market over decades. These assets do not provide the immediate social validation of a flashy car. Nobody will stop you on the street to admire your investment portfolio. But 20 years from now, the person who consistently directed money into appreciating assets rather than depreciating ones will find themselves in a position of genuine, sustainable financial security that no amount of Instagram performance can create. The practical implication of this is straightforward but genuinely difficult to execute in a culture that bombards you with images of luxurious consumption every time you pick up your phone. Live below your means during the period when you are building wealth. Not forever. Wealth creation is ultimately in service of being able to live well, but during the critical accumulation phase, resist the pressure to spend money performing success that you have not yet achieved. Mistake number 3, trying to do everything yourself. There is a narrative in entrepreneurial culture that glorifies the lone genius, the visionary individual who conceives, builds, and executes everything independently through sheer force of will and intelligence. It is a compelling story. It is also almost entirely fictional. Look carefully at any significant business success in history and you will find collaboration at its foundation. The names we attach to great companies are often the most visible members of larger teams, not singular creators working in isolation. The myth of the lone entrepreneur persists partly because it makes for a cleaner story and partly because the people involved have strong incentives to perpetuate it. But the operational reality is always more complex and more collaborative than the simplified narrative suggests. The PayPal story is a perfect illustration of this. The company is often discussed in relation to a small number of prominent names, but what made it genuinely extraordinary was what happened afterward. The people who built PayPal and benefited from its acquisition dispersed across the technology industry carrying not just capital but a dense network of relationships, a shared set of values about how to build companies, and a habit of mutual support that continued to compound for decades. YouTube, LinkedIn, Yelp, SpaceX, these companies emerged from that same network of people helping each other, investing in each other's projects, and sharing knowledge accumulated through shared experience. That network effect was worth more than any individual's talent in isolation. For most people reading this, the practical application of this principle is not about assembling a team to build a billion-dollar technology company. It is about recognizing that collaboration, delegation, and strategic partnerships are available at every scale of ambition and that refusing to embrace them is a choice that limits how far you can go. There is a specific opportunity worth highlighting here that many people overlook entirely. Established business owners who built their companies in an era before digital technology became central to commercial operations are frequently struggling to adapt. They understand their industry deeply. They have customer relationships, operational experience, and domain knowledge that took decades to accumulate. What they often lack is comfort and competence with the digital tools that now determine whether a business is visible, competitive, and efficiently run. This creates a genuine opportunity for younger people who have grown up in the digital environment and find these tools intuitive. Helping an established business owner modernize their online presence, automate their internal processes, or understand how to reach customers through digital channels is genuinely valuable work that many of these business owners are actively willing to pay for. The knowledge gap is real, the need is urgent, and the supply of people who can bridge it effectively is still relatively limited. The tools available to do this work have also become remarkably powerful and accessible. Platforms like Odoo consolidate the functions that used to require multiple separate software systems, website management, customer relationship tracking, project management, invoicing, inventory control, into a single integrated environment that can be deployed and managed without extensive technical expertise. Being able to offer a business owner a coherent, modern operational infrastructure rather than a patchwork of disconnected tools is a meaningful competitive advantage. The broader point, beyond any specific tool or opportunity, is this: the people who build significant wealth almost never do it alone. They build systems, recruit talent, form partnerships, and leverage other people's capabilities strategically. The sooner you internalize this and start thinking about how to multiply your impact through collaboration rather than trying to personally execute every function, the faster your progress will accelerate. Mistake number 4, consuming too many opinions. We live in an environment of unprecedented information abundance. The collective knowledge of human civilization is accessible from a device that fits in your pocket. Expert opinion on virtually any topic is available instantly and often for free. In theory, this should make it easier than ever to make good decisions and navigate toward your goals efficiently. In practice, it often does the opposite. The problem is not a lack of information. The problem is an excess of it, combined with the absence of any reliable framework for evaluating which information is actually relevant and valuable for your specific situation. When you are trying to figure out what career to pursue, or whether to start a business, or how to invest your savings, the sheer volume of contradictory advice available is more paralyzing than helpful. Every expert has a different framework. Every framework contradicts several others. Every piece of advice that seems compelling is countered by an equally compelling argument pointing in the opposite direction. This creates a state that psychologists call cognitive overload, the mental experience of having more information and options than your brain can productively process. The typical response to cognitive overload is not better decision-making. It is either paralysis, the inability to commit to any course of action because every option seems simultaneously promising and risky, or impulsive decisions made to escape the discomfort of uncertainty, which frequently turn out to be poor ones. The solution I have found consistently effective is to work backwards from a clearly defined destination. Not a vague aspiration, not simply wanting to be wealthy or successful or free, but a specific enough vision of what you are trying to build that you can use it as a filter for incoming information. When you know where you are going, the question of whether any particular piece of advice is relevant becomes much easier to answer. Does this help me move toward that specific goal? If yes, pay attention. If no, set it aside regardless of how compelling it might seem in the abstract. Equally important is the quality rather than quantity of the inputs you choose to pay attention to. Most of the opinions you receive about your financial and professional decisions come from people who have no particular expertise in the area they are opining on. Friends and family offer advice based on their own experiences, fears, and assumptions, which may have very little relevance to your specific situation and ambitions. General internet content is produced to attract attention rather than to provide genuinely calibrated guidance for your particular circumstances. Seek out people who have actually done what you are trying to do. Not people who teach about it, write about it, or theorize about it, people who have personally executed it and can speak from direct experience about what worked, what did not, and what they would do differently. That kind of specific, experiential knowledge is worth more than any amount of general advice, however eloquently delivered. Mistake number 5, letting your ego drive decisions. This one is difficult to discuss honestly because the people who most need to hear it are the least likely to recognize themselves in the description. That is, by definition, what ego does, it creates a blind spot precisely where it is most damaging. Ego-driven thinking in a financial and professional context tends to manifest in specific patterns. The conviction that you already understand things well enough that further learning is unnecessary. The tendency to dismiss advice from people whose surface-level presentation or credentials do not immediately impress you, even when the substance of what they are saying is genuinely valuable. The focus on how decisions reflect on you rather than whether they are actually correct. The preference for appearing successful over doing the unglamorous work that creates genuine success. The genuinely dangerous thing about ego is that it feels like confidence. From the inside, dismissing advice you do not want to hear can feel like having strong convictions. Avoiding unfamiliar situations can feel like knowing your strengths. Focusing on the vision of the finished result rather than the detailed work required to achieve it can feel like thinking big. These are all reframings that ego provides to protect itself, and they are all financially costly. The concept of the iceberg is useful here. What you currently know and understand represents the small visible portion above the waterline. What you do not yet know, the methodologies, the relationships, the market dynamics, the failure modes, the subtle judgment calls that only come from experience, constitutes the enormous submerged mass that you cannot see from where you are standing. Ego convinces you that the visible portion is most of the iceberg. Genuine intellectual humility recognizes that everything above the waterline is a small fraction of what actually matters. The most consistently successful people I have encountered in business share a quality that initially seems surprising given their level of achievement. They are genuinely curious. They ask more questions than they answer. They actively seek out people who know things they do not and treat those conversations as valuable rather than threatening. They maintain a learner's orientation even after achieving things that might reasonably justify a more instructional posture. That orientation is not incidental to their success. It is a primary driver of it. Mistake number 6, defaulting to blame. There is a Chinese proverb that I return to regularly because it captures something important with unusual precision. The man who blames others has a long journey ahead of him. The man who blames himself is halfway there. The man who blames no one has already arrived. Think about that for a moment. Not the first two positions but the third one. The person who has truly arrived is not someone who has become skilled at accepting blame for everything, beating themselves up for every setback, or drowning in self-criticism. It is someone who has moved entirely beyond the question of blame because they are too focused on solutions to waste cognitive energy on attribution. The blame instinct is deeply human and almost entirely counterproductive. When things go wrong, and things will always go wrong, regardless of how well prepared or capable you are, the automatic psychological response is to locate the cause outside yourself. The teacher was unfair. The market was irrational. The timing was wrong. The competition cheated. The system is rigged. These explanations have the psychological advantage of preserving your self-image intact. They have the practical disadvantage of leaving you with no leverage to improve the situation, because you have located the problem in factors outside your control. The mirror versus magnifying glass framework is one I find genuinely useful for making this concrete. When you reach for the magnifying glass, you are directing your attention outward, looking at other people's actions, other people's failures, external circumstances beyond your influence. When you reach for the mirror, you are directing your attention inward, asking what you could have done differently, what assumptions you made that turned out to be wrong, what you can learn from this outcome that will make you more effective going forward. This is not about self-punishment. It is about agency. The person who consistently asks what they could have done differently retains the ability to improve. The person who consistently locates failure in external factors gives away that ability. Over a career and a lifetime, the compounding difference between these two orientations is enormous. Mistake number 7, staying in your comfort zone. Your comfort zone is not a place. It is a habit. It is the accumulated set of situations, activities, and challenges that you have decided, consciously or not, fall within the range of what you are willing to experience. Everything outside that range gets filtered out, opportunities avoided, experiences missed, capabilities never developed, because your nervous system has learned to treat the unfamiliar as threatening. The research on this is consistent and somewhat uncomfortable. A significant proportion of people go through their entire adult lives without meaningfully expanding the boundaries of what they are willing to attempt. They make the same kinds of decisions, take the same kinds of risks, and consequently experience the same kinds of outcomes year after year. And a substantial portion of them, when surveyed late in life, report regret about precisely this pattern: the roads not taken, the attempts not made, the possibilities that remained forever theoretical. My own relationship with this dynamic has been the defining thread running through everything I have built. When I left school without qualifications and chose the carpenter's apprenticeship over more immediately comfortable options, that was a genuine expansion of my comfort zone. When I started experimenting with side businesses while holding down employment, that was another expansion. When I took out a bank loan to fund my first serious business venture, the level of discomfort I experienced was real and significant, but so was the growth that came from navigating it. When I eventually decided to travel to China to find a manufacturer for my radio-controlled aircraft brand, I was operating so far outside my original comfort zone that the person I had been at 16 would not have recognized it as a situation he could handle. The language barriers were real. The cultural differences were real. The risk was real. And the outcome, building relationships that became the foundation of a genuinely international business, was only accessible because I was willing to tolerate that discomfort. The pattern I would draw your attention to is that none of these expansions required abandoning security entirely and jumping off a cliff into the unknown. Each one was a deliberate, considered step beyond the current boundary. Each one created a new normal that made the next step feel more manageable than it would have before. Comfort zones do not expand in single dramatic leaps. They expand through consistent, repeated small extensions of what you are willing to attempt. The other crucial point is that this process does not have a natural endpoint determined by age or circumstance. When I started posting videos on YouTube at 53, I was stepping outside a comfort zone that had formed around an already successful business life. The discomfort was genuine. The vulnerability of putting yourself in front of a camera and inviting public judgment is real regardless of what you have already accomplished. But the reason for doing it was equally real: I had accumulated knowledge and experience that seemed genuinely useful to people who were earlier in their financial journeys, and I did not see many people sharing it honestly rather than performatively. The space beyond your current comfort zone is not fixed in size. It is effectively infinite. Every step you take into it creates new territory that gradually becomes familiar, which in turn reveals further territory beyond that. The only meaningful limit is the one you impose by deciding that where you currently are is sufficient. It almost certainly is not. And somewhere, in the discomfort of the unfamiliar, the best version of your financial life is waiting for you to come and find it, you said.